Andrew Huberman went on the Diary of a CEO podcast and exposed how porn is damaging your brain.
He's careful to stay out of the morals of it, sticking straight to the science, but immediately dove into why internet porn can be extremely addictive. The reason is wild, and you're not going to guess what the antidote is. So let's go ahead and check this out.
That I'm curious about as it relates to dopamine is pornography. I think pornography has become more readily available now than ever before.
Certainly.
I can go on any social media platform, especially X, and I scroll down for long enough, I will be exposed to pornography, whether I chose to go and seek it out or not.
Yeah, it'll find you.
It'll find you.
Dang, that is pretty much such a problem.
How easily accessible it is.
You don't even have to find it. It will find you.
He said that very accurately.
Yeah.
Well, and we know that the porn industry is actually set up that way. So like they will intentionally, especially like they intentionally target kids. And so they will misspell Disney characters.
Or SpongeBob.
Yes, like cartoons. And then it'll, in common ways, the kids misspell things and it'll take them to something explicit instead of the cartoon that the kid was actually trying to find. So even for kids, this is happening, not just adults.
Application. So it's especially concerning for young people who are in those formative years. But what is your view on pornography, dopamine, and the overall social harm of pornography?
And so just so you know, Andrew Huberman is a neuroscientist. And so what he's going to talk about is his area of expertise. Like he understands how the brain works and how it's actually going to be tied to pornography.
Yeah, so this is a controversial topic because obviously people have different opinions on limiting personal freedom, right? Both expression and consumption of pornography, right? But moving that aside and just focusing on things through the lens of biology and the dopamine system.
Actually, that's a really good point that I want to pause on. In Red Light Rebellion, we do awareness and prevention for sex trafficking, and we talk about both the risks and the protective factors to trafficking and exploitation. And so we actually talk about the harmful effects of pornography. And even though we are a Christian nonprofit, we are in a lot of public schools. And so we actually take it from the scientific perspective.
Yeah, there are a lot of moral arguments against pornography, but the way that we talk about it in the stance that we take very much is from research, just like Andrew Huberman's. That's from the science perspective, because everyone's morals are different. And we want to know, how does this actually affect humanity? And is there a solid argument in that space outside of morals? So that's the same stance that we take as well too.
Yeah. And so then it's like, hey, we're going to give you the facts and then you can decide what do you want to be impacting your life, how you want that to impact your life. So, all right, let's let them cook.
We know that the more stimulating, the more intense an experience, the greater the increase in dopamine. I mean, it's very clear based on neuroimaging studies that.
So then he's going to go into talking about the connection between that phenomenon and like drugs and other addictive substances.
Yeah.
And he's going to say that pornography affects the brain in the same way. And so what's happening when someone is viewing online pornography is that their brain doesn't know that that experience is not real. Like even though consciously, like our conscious, like prefrontal cortex, front of our brain as humans, and it was like, yeah, that's a screen. Our brain is responding to it the same way as if it were actually like physically happening. So you're going to get that dopamine dump. You're going to get all of these like neurochemicals in our brains that are going to respond to the same thing on the screen as if it were physically happening to us. But it's hijacking that dopamine system.
Yeah, and that's where he like goes on to talk a little bit about how even like drugs and sex share the level of dopamine that can be released, where coffee cannot release the same amount of dopamine that things like drugs and sex do. And so
Absolutely. But then what's happening is like that dopamine system in the brain, he talks about this earlier in the podcast, is all about reward. It's like, hey, I did something to promote life. I did something to better myself and better others. And so when you do something that there is no effort in it, there was nothing to get like a reward or a dopamine dump from, then that is actually hijacking the reward pathway, and it actually does too much of a dopamine dump in our brains. And that's what drugs do. That's what internet, like pornography, can do. And all
well, he talks about like how the high gets so much higher than it's supposed to be, and then how the low even gets so much lower than what it should be. So you had a good day and things settle down. When they settle down to the point where it's like sad and depressing is where things like that kind of like dopamine cycle takes people through.
Well, and that is actually the response that the brain has that's completely unexpected when someone watches pornography after that massive dopamine spike. Let's actually have Andrew explain this.
And duration. If somebody is consuming, let's call it very intense aka high dopamine releasing pornography on a regular basis, what do we know? That peak in dopamine will start to lessen. It'll be lower and lower, and the trough.
So he's talking about that peak is exactly what Brandon was talking about. It's almost like a intolerance that's building up or a tolerance that's not an intolerance, but a tolerance that's building up. So that peak, that high, isn't as enticing. It's almost like you take that first hit of a drug, but then you need more often, more frequently after that to get the same first high. We hear a lot of that stories with like drug addicts.
Yeah.
Same thing happens with when someone's viewing pornography on a consistent basis. Like it doesn't feel as good after you've been doing it for so long. And so he's talking about that high gets lower, but then he talks about the trough. Then he talks about when it dips, like Brandon was talking about here.
In dopamine, after they view that pornography, will be deeper trough and longer trough, meaning they are very likely, we don't know for sure, but very likely to seek out more and more intense experiences to try and just get them back to baseline. Pretty soon, pornography that at one time was very stimulating for them is no longer stimulating. Now,
Dang, y'all, that is...
Yep.
The
Addiction
story
101.
of addiction for sure is just that the nature of addiction is what he just described, is that it will always require more to feed that beast.
Yes.
And eventually what was enough before isn't going to be enough. And that's where we see in the context of sex trafficking, so many people find themselves making decisions, seeking things out that they never would have thought of because of something like the addiction taking them to a place to be something they never thought they would be.
Which in the context of like a pornography or sex addiction could lead them to physically acting out and actually engaging with people in real life that are being sex trafficked, let alone the risk that someone is being trafficked in those videos and there's no way how to tell.
Right.
And I actually remember the first time I ever learned this concept that Andrew's talking about here, we were actually in like a pretty intense like therapy process for couples that were going through like basically betrayal trauma and sexual addiction.
And sex addiction with porn.
And so like we had been getting a whole bunch of resources to help Brandon in his journey. And one of the things that we always knew about was that high. Was that like, oh, like you get that high from that dopamine release and then eventually you build a tolerance to it and then you need more and more often, more frequently, that type of a deal. What I didn't realize was the dip below. So it's like you have a baseline for like dopamine, and like when your dopamine's there, like you've got food and friends and high intense activities or sex, right? That like will spike that dopamine. Those are all natural things. But then when you get something that hijacks that reward pathway, that dopamine pathway, it spikes up. And I never knew it went down below baseline. And so then those that are struggling with addiction, any kind of addiction, that's going to make them lonely, depressed. They're going to struggle with anxiety. Like that has a whole slew of like mental health consequences and feeds that addiction cycle of tolerance in a way that like I had never understood before on that scientific level. And I was so glad that Andrew brought this up, because oftentimes we just think about it being like too much of something bad, but it actually takes us below baseline and takes us to that really depressed place, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting because I've talked to so many guys that have had the same struggle, been in programs with them. And it's just that common experience that you're describing of just that like low place and trying to like get out of that like dip below. It's so common for people just to reach back out to the thing that got them high in the first place. And man, that is the recipe for spinning your life out of control.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so this is creating a cycle that many don't know how to get out of.
Right.
And how they end up feeling about it is actually the opposite of what a lot of people think or how the porn industry actually portrays itself. So let's actually have Andrew address that.
Because I hear from thousands over the last few years of the podcast. I've heard from thousands of males that are like, they were addicted to porn.
How do they feel?
It sounds to me as if they feel very dejected. And some of them actually have said they felt very kind of misled, like almost like this natural stimulus for them was dangled in front of them, and they just gravitated towards it the same way that any biological organism would gravitate towards something that was triggering its dopamine system. And now
and because it's natural, like pornography is about sex, and that like sex is natural for humans to engage.
Yeah. And I appreciate just so much of how he worded that in his like sciencey way of like the way any biological organism would go towards something that releases dopamine. But I think like what is so powerful to me about that is that it's not about shame. And I think so many people get stuck in the shame of all of this, but I think there's just a reality of like, as humans, there's a part of humanity that is sexual, and pornography has figured out how to hack that in a way that few other things have.
Yep.
And so I think he was talking about so many young men are just pursuing like that dopamine release without even thinking about it, because that's how we're biologically wired. And that's just like how we work as humans. And so I think there is a piece of men being taken advantage of by pornography that doesn't have to do with the character of men.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because like Huberman goes on to talk about how these men are talking about how they feel depleted, they're stuck, they like don't know what to do about it. And so we believe that like the porn industry has sold a lie. They've said that it's all just pleasure and not talking about any of the downsides of things. And so we believe if there's something harmful, then you deserve to know about it, so you can actually make the decisions that you want to make. And so there's like literally studies after studies, like dozens and hundreds of studies that talk about these harmful effects of pornography. Right. And they're right. Like these guys are right. And women too that struggle with pornography.
For sure.
Like they have been sold a lie. And we talk about this as an anti-trafficking organization because that addiction, like we mentioned before, it can lead someone to actually purchasing another person's body that's being trafficked. Like there's also the fact that like on the screen, someone could be being trafficked and you have no idea how to tell because it's all made and produced to look the same. And yet the industry isn't telling you about that. Like they're just like painting like this great picture of, you know, all these things that
just
could
like
be
freedom
yours.
and liberation.
Exactly. Instead of talking about the actual like harmful effects about something. And as a society, I think that needs to shift. Like we had a whole entire season of like the cigarette industry talking about like doctors being like, yeah, I smoke Camels, right? Like Camel cigarettes. And then it took decades of the science actually being there and society fighting about it to finally come to the point where like, oh, that causes cancer. So now we all very well know that cigarettes cause cancer. And now it's up to us. Are we actually going to engage that? Do we want to do that to our bodies? But it's an informed decision. Right now, we don't have take morals out of the situation. We don't have any informed decision on pornography on a massive like societal scale. Everyone's still trying to debate it, you know?
Like, should there be some little thing that comes up before every video that says, this is going to destroy your life and rot your brain out?
Right. Especially for developing brains, right?
Right? Well, I mean, it's the fact that it's so widely available to minors is a whole other video that we'll get into and a whole other topic for sure. But
the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has a lot to say on that. Do you want to go through?
But at the very least, like you were saying, we should know if something has harmful effects to it and what we're signing up for before we engage things.
Absolutely. So what is the remedy to all of this? Because you might be thinking, okay, well, abstinence is the remedy. Just don't look at it.
Stop.
Yes. And we'll get there. But Andrew actually shares what the opposite of addiction actually is. And it is the missing link in all of this.
And then I thought about a lot what you said about people messaging you, thousands of them, about pornography. And the unfortunate thing about the abstinence advice is it leaves them with, many of them with, what alternative?
I mean, one would hope, depending on, you know, the circumstances, that they would seek out healthy relationships.
And then
Absolutely. Healthy relationships. And then he continues in another part here.
Healthy relationships are absolutely fundamental. Here's what we know. Many, many people are struggling nowadays from what we hear of as the isolation crisis. But all it takes is one trusting, reliable relationship to start to shift.
So just a point there, they're saying that this generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, is a lonely generation alive, that they struggle with loneliness more than anyone else. So this advice is key.
If that in the right direction. I am so adamant about this. One of the most powerful things that anyone can do, believe it or not, is to have someone each morning that they text good morning to. I know this is going to sound trivial, corny, and I'm happy to take the heat on this one.
Yeah, so this is so like impactful that I think he's taking such a strong stand on this, because I think even to what he was just talking about with like healthy relationships, and to clarify too, he's not just talking about romantic healthy relationships being the key. He's talking about healthy connection. And because the reason, so out of the dozens of guys that I've done life with in some capacity of figuring out and navigating an addiction like this, I can't think of a single person who did not turn to pornography because something else was missing in their life. Some other piece of connection was missing. Or maybe it wasn't missing in the first place, but then they start turning to pornography and then it went missing because they got so hyper focused on it. And so there is, with any addiction, you can't replace an addiction with nothing. You have to replace it with something. And that's where that connection piece that he's talking about ultimately is the path to being able to make different decisions. You can't, if you're like hanging on by a branch off a cliff and you just like let go, you fall to the ground. You have to have something else that you're grabbing onto.
Absolutely. Well, and I remember the first time I learned this was through that therapy process. I think it was like week 1. You had been like for a couple of weeks in like the group setting, and like I showed up in like week 2 or 3. And they talked about how the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. It's not with like abstaining or withholding from something. It's actually connection, because addiction isn't just wanting something too much and then acting out on that. Addiction is the mismanaging of emotions. Right. What happens when someone that's struggling with addiction, they're going through something uncomfortable internally, something that they don't know how to handle. Instead of reaching out for support and connection with someone that can actually help them, they turn to their vice, and that creates that addiction cycle. And so the cure to that addiction cycle, yes, like abstinence and like sobriety is a part of that, but actually reaching out for that connection. And I love that like Andrew talked about that, because you typically think like a scientist, right? Like he's a scientist, he does research, he has his whole entire like laboratory, like, like he's got a whole team that he's doing studies on, and he goes back to relationship. It's not, oh, well, we can reset your dopamine like this and do this little routine.
Take this pill.
And like it's not medication, right? It is actually human connection. Like we are wired for each other in our brains, and addiction hijacks that. And so we have to go back to that. And I love that he went there, especially as a scientist.
Yeah, we know this, again, addiction has some devastating effects for families and for individuals. And like there is a major reality in pornography of victims being sex trafficked through pornography. And that reality has to be acknowledged. And we need to like move away from a society that glamorizes things like sex trafficking and that being entertainment for us. But also, we don't want to like heap shame on someone for having participated and being entertained by something that they didn't know was harming actual people. And so again, like there's so much shame wrapped up in this. Like Brianna was saying, we are really passionate about having a conversation that can help people move forward in their life and not be stuck in that addiction cycle.
Absolutely. And so if you need help and resources, we actually have some for you. You can go to our website. We're going to put this in the pinned comment below, but this is our demand prevention page. And so if you want to learn more about the science that Andrew was talking about, you can go to Fight the New Drug or Truth About Porn, or even like hit up the documentary. If you're not a big reader, this crushes it. This
Guys,
is my Fight the New Drug.
It's seriously so good. Fight the New Drug. They've gathered all the peer-reviewed scientific research and made it so like they've done such a like justice for humanity. It's wild.
It really is. It makes it super simple and easy to understand all the science that Andrew was talking about. But if you actually need help, if you are struggling yourself, these are some of our favorite resources. There are more out there, but these are ones that we love to highlight: Join Fortify and Relay. Those are apps with online communities for recovery. I think they even have some free plans, like if you're a student or like a minor. And then Band of Brothers is now Valor, but this is like a therapy program, and they've got in-person programming in the greater Phoenix area. But I believe they started doing some online stuff for students.
I actually got to hang out with one of the groups, and what they do with teens navigating this issue is unlike anything I've seen. So
I'm not sure another like program like this exists in the country.
Yeah,
like, it's insane.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, but you'll even be able to go to the website of like that counseling office, and you'll be able to learn like, hey, what's a CSAT, like a certified sex addiction therapist? Like, what are some of like the professionals you even need in your life if you're going to pursue like recovery in a therapeutic way? There's 12 steps. There's a whole lot of options out there for people. And more options are coming. The bigger this conversation happens, the more resources there are than there were for us like 10 years ago when we were like fresh navigating all of this. So we hope that's helpful. And if you need help or have questions, definitely let us know.